We're here again to have another conversation that we call Attempted Intelligence. This time, the hope is to take a concept that we've spoken about somewhat in the past with respect to the concept of transfer in education or transfer in learning, and then draw that or map that onto day-to-day life on some level. So, you have told me previous to this that for varying reasons, your brain isn't necessarily working at peak function, which is completely fine. This is why we call it attempted intelligence, because whether we're not we're smart doesn't matter. We're attempted. So I'll give a general definition for transfer. It is essentially learning a skill, learning a skill, some knowledge, or a set of problem-solving skills in one setting or one context, and then having the ability to apply that newly learned skill or knowledge in a dissimilar context. So then we will often break that off into near and far transfer. Do you have some sense or some capacity to describe the difference between near and far transfer, or to describe near transfer and far transfer such that the difference is suggested?
Well, I can attempt to do so.
Yeah,
and
attempts are good.
So near transfer would be learning in a setting and then applying that information in a slightly dissimilar setting. And then far transfer would be learning in a setting and then applying that information in a vastly different
So one of the big deals with far transfer is that the superficial context, the superficial environment is the thing that has changed heavily.
Right. So
let's just say you learn a skill in a classroom, and then I ask you to apply it on top of a mountain, right? You're like, what?
Yeah.
Well, this is a mountain. So the superficial settings are often the thing that is highly different. Now, near transfer seems to show up fairly often.
Okay.
Right? So when research is applied, near transfer occurs, right? So I learned in my apartment, and then I am asked to do the skill in a different apartment. Or I learned in a kitchen that is set up like my kitchen, and then I'm asked to do something in somebody else's kitchen. Now the setup may be different, but it's still a kitchen. It still has the same salient superficial features: a sink, a counter, a stove, an oven,
whatever, yeah.
Right? All that stuff. Stuff might be in different places, but I can search and I can figure it out because the superficial stuff is so similar. If I ask you to learn how to cook a meal in a standard kitchen, a standard North American kitchen, let's say, and then I ask you to do the same thing in an outdoor setting where you have a wood stove, right? You have some rocks, you have an open fire, you can heat those rocks up, those can be essentially stove elements. You're gonna have a hard time. Right? So it's like, I don't know what to do. Where's the oven? It's like, no, the rock's there. Like,
yeah.
Or where's the stove? The rock's the stove. Heat up the rock. How do I heat up the rock? Start a fire? Right? So the idea with far transfer is that it shows up far less often, at least if we're looking for it in a spontaneous fashion. So I don't give you any cues, and I say, okay, you learned how to make an omelet in a kitchen.
Right.
I want you to make an omelet in a camp, like in a camp setting,
yeah.
But I'm not going to give you like a standard camp stove. Right. We're going to make you figure it out. Right. So you may figure it out, but it's very unlikely. Now, what we have is a situation whereby when we do identify far transfer, it is usually in experts in a field, or it is when people are explicitly taught what are called the deep structures. The deep structures are not necessarily agreed upon, so there's not necessarily a good definition of this, but your deep features or your deep structures could be a problem-solving schema, the underlying principle, what have you. There's varying things that could be. There's no good agreement on that I'm able to identify. But if I teach you the underlying thing, so let's just say we take our kitchen analogy or our omelet analogy.
I was just going to say, if we take the kitchen, it's like the deep-seated the kitchen.
Okay, so the deal is, if I need to cook an omelet, is a kitchen the salient feature?
I feel like fire is.
What would you call, is fire maybe the best term, or is there something else? Yes.
Heat.
A certain level of heat that can be conducted from the source of heat through a pan or through something that will hold the egg where it can cook.
Some heat-resistant container.
Heat conductive, at least. Heat conductive, because if it's heat resistant, it doesn't heat up. Heat conductive. And the idea is that it has a shape so that the egg doesn't run all over the place. So if the deep feature is not kitchen, the deep feature is transferring heat from one location to a heat conductive pan or a heat conductive thing that can shape the egg, right? Then you understand, then you may be more likely to figure it out from one context to the next. So we have some basic understanding there that if you understand the underlying features, the thing that guides it, the principle, the concept, and it's explicit. It's not implied, it's explicitly told. We tend to be able to see far transfer better. Now there is an argument to be made that that's just following instructions, right? And that's an argument, but realistically, if we don't see it any other way, how are we going to do it? So we actively try to create spontaneous transfer without cueing, but if we don't tell you any of the underlying features, you can't tell. So it's like you learn how to jump when the walls are orange, right? And then I put you in a purple room. You don't know what to do because the orange isn't there. There's a missing cue, right? So you have to be able to identify what the cue would be to jump, right? So if my cue for cooking is I'm hungry and I have eggs, right? What do? Now we start to teach you to understand the deep concept, like how to, this is what my goal is, this is what the outcome I want is. Now I want you to understand that that's what it is, so that regardless of the situation, you can problem solve.
So I'm just curious, is this happening in our education system? Is this happening in the learning that we're doing in general society where we're understanding these deeper layers, these concepts, or are we just doing this superficial near transfer?
So are you when you ask, is it, are you asking if it is a well understood concept by all educators and they're actively applying it?
Yes.
No.
Okay.
It may be part, you went through teachers college. Did you learn about far transfer?
No.
Did you learn about transfer generally?
No, I did not.
Did you just learn how to talk to people to transmit information? Did it work the way they said it would?
No.
Okay.
There was a lot of troubleshooting.
There you go. So no, I wouldn't suggest, and I mean, in no way would I call myself an expert on all levels of education and all forms of education in all systems, in all countries, in all cultures. No, but the concept of near and far transfer. So they've been looking to identify near and far transfer for over 100 years. And near transfer shows up regularly, far transfer is very, very rare, and that's why we've talked about the concept of preparation for future learning as a paradigm to show something or to look for something different. So transfer paradigms generally are looking for what's called direct application or sequential problem solving, whereby I teach you something in one area, I put you in a dissimilar area to some degree, and I expect to see the replication, an accurate replication of that knowledge or skill. Near transfer, it happens. Far transfer, not so much. So we look at PFL, or preparation for future learning, because what we're trying to measure there is signs of increased speed or quality of learning, right? So it's just you're looking for something different.
Right.
But what we see, again, to just keep coming back and reinforcing the concept of far transfer, if we explicitly teach you the underlying concept and we superficially change the environment or the setting or the context quite a bit, you're able to pick it up because you understand the goal, the outcome, the underlying concepts. You understand them well, and it's explicit. It can't be implied. It has to be
explicit.
It has to be clearly explained.
Right.
So we see this in dedicated educational settings, or we can research this phenomenon in dedicated educational settings where the whole aim is to learn something and then take it on to the broader world and use it, right? The reason I want to bring this up is to say that if we have a hard time finding far transfer or the ability to learn a piece of information about something and apply it in a dissimilar setting, if we have a hard time finding that in dedicated educational settings and dedicated learning settings, it would be interesting to me as to whether or not this phenomena would replicate in social settings, right? So I'm pretty sure that I explain something to you and then you don't do it in this new situation. It's like we have an agreement, Mark. When this thing happens, this is what you do. So no matter what I say, no matter what question I ask you, you just say yes, right? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I don't think that works out well for either one of us
No.
to play along with. I'm like, hey, Mark, don't you agree?
About what?
About what? Right? So neither of us seem to play that game well, because we want to know what's actually going on. We want to have that discussion. But the idea that near transfer, right? So, hey Mark, no matter where we are, if I, out of nowhere, ask you a question, or ask you to confirm a question, will you agree to just say yes?
I can do that for you.
Okay, you can do that for me, right? Again, explicit.
Right.
But if it's implicit, this is the deal. If I'm like, hey Mark, like just back me up. Whatever's happening, just back me up. And, what do you mean, whatever? Just back it.
I have more questions.
But what if it's against my general view of the world? What if it hurts my morals? What do I do?
Yeah.
So it's not going to work the same. Now, let's just say there's something that you deeply dislike. You dislike it so much that you actively avoid it, and you expect that because you actively avoid it, everybody knows you don't like it.
Okay.
What happens when somebody hasn't picked up on that signal and they bring that thing into your sphere? You have to experience that thing as a complete accident, but they don't know that you don't like it because you have the expectation that your avoidance is the cue.
Right.
What do?
Well,
not you. The hypothetical you that is more standard.
Well, there's going to be conflict. I'm basically going to try and explain to them how and why they should know because of all my cues that have been given.
Mm-hmm. Or how does it come up in your more common understanding or your more common experience of people and social interactions? Have you ever had that situation in your life where something happens and somebody's mad at you, but you don't understand why they're mad at you, and they're like, well, what is it that's bugging you? You should already know. That's occurred.
Yeah.
So the reason that I think this maps reasonably well is because when we are meeting somebody, an individual that we don't know anything about, we're blind, right? We need to learn about that person. Now, in learning about that person, there's some stuff that our view of the world will pick up no problem. There's stuff, the idea of expertise having a challenge or people having a challenge not necessarily paying attention to previously learned information. So let's just say I've only lived in one town my entire life, and it wasn't a fairly big town, and that's how I expect everybody to act, and then I moved to a different town, and that's not how people act, right? I have these expectations, and that's not how it goes in this new setting. Right? So people are meeting me, and they're thinking that I'm going to behave somewhat like them. I'm meeting them, I'm feeling like they should behave somewhat like me, right? And neither one of us is explicit because it's implied, it's just expected.
Right.
It's like, yeah, they'll figure it out, no big deal. Everybody does this, so, I mean, come on, how come you don't?
Right.
You're the weirdo, right? So we're somewhat blind, and we have a hard time ignoring the things that guide us moment to moment and day to day.
So you're saying if that, for example, the new person comes into town and they're meeting someone and they say, hey, I'm from a small town and this is how we normally do things, so if I'm doing something dissimilar or whatever it is, this is why, right?
That would be explicit communication of an underlying principle.
Right. But I'm just saying, like, that would assist.
Yeah, it would probably remove the likely implied conflict or the unspoken stuff. So I think the big deal, as you brought forth, I think it's just because it's how you work. I'm gonna tell you ahead of time.
Yeah.
So that when it happens, at least I told you, and if you get mad at me, it's your own fault.
Yes.
So the idea being that you're much more likely to explicitly communicate things. And I think it may be due to experiences that haven't gone the way that you'd hoped. So you're like, you know what, I'm just going to tell you. I'm just going to lay it out, and that's how it's going to be. And then if you get it wrong, well, I'm just going to assume you didn't get it, and I'm not going to be mad at you. Or you could be mad at them because I told you.
Yeah.
I told you.
I explicitly told you.
I told you this thing. That's not how I see you work. You just tend to shake your head. And go, I do too. It's at least possible that I'm more likely to, I wouldn't call it browbeat, but no, that's exactly what I told you. I told you would go this way, this way, this way. If you'd like me to recall it, I believe I videotaped it, which I didn't, but
Right. Yeah.
I seem to really appreciate explicit communication. It seems to really be my bag.
Okay.
But the idea being that I shouldn't expect you to know something about me that you have no experience or insight into. I don't believe that that's fair. I don't believe that that's reasonable. So if you haven't been around me my whole life, there's stuff that you don't happen to know about me just by sheer accident.
Right.
I can communicate it to you to the best of my ability, but you didn't experience it. So we don't have that shared experience. So it becomes more important to communicate explicitly. The implied stuff. So implied stuff is more likely to map onto, I would say, near transfer. So, we were at a pizza joint and you don't like a specific type of meat, whatever that happens to be.
Some topping, whatever it is.
Some topping. So when we go to another restaurant, if I coded that Mark doesn't like this on pizza, then when we're at the restaurant and I'm like, hey, you should try this, and it has that thing that you don't like in it, and you show disgust, I may not understand. Right? But if it's like, so that's kind of a near transfer phenomenon.
Right.
I expect that you don't like it on pizza, but I think you might like it other places. Right? Whereas the far transfer experience may be, Mark doesn't like tomatoes. Right? He doesn't like tomato sauce. He doesn't like tomatoes. Right? So that no matter where we go, like, no, don't get the Greek salad, it's got tomatoes. Right? I can make that because I can code. You can tell me you don't like tomatoes. Like, well, what about tomato sauce? Tomato sauce is fine. Right? But tomatoes, I don't like. So then no matter, because that's the underlying concept, that's the deep feature. Tomatoes are the deep feature, so no matter where we go, you don't like it.
Does it make it more complicated if I don't like something specifically at one location?
Yes. Yeah. Well, and there's multiple layers to this, and this is why it gets so confusing. So we're talking about a learning process, learning things about an individual. It becomes much more useful as far, if we're to map this, and if there is something reasonable to suggest that the paradigm or the concepts and the observations of near and far transfer map onto social circumstances. I don't know that they do, right? But I have a pretty strong hunch that they might. Because what we're doing is we're observing behavior. We're observing behavior and learning and the ability to take it from one location to another.
So I don't know if it's an individual's responsibility at that point when you're trying to get to know someone to actually take it from that superficial level and go deeper. So if I notice that you don't like pineapple on your pizza and then we go to another location and then I ask, do you just dislike pineapple on your pizza or do you dislike pineapple in general before I order this because it has pineapple on it?
I think that if we maybe wheel back to locus of control, right? Internal versus external. If I have the expectation that people should be paying attention to me no matter what I do and they should understand, because, if they're just decent human beings, if they pay attention to me and understand it, and if I have to tell them, then they're not decent people, right? Then that's an external locus of control, and it's your fault for not knowing that I don't like pineapple on pizza anywhere. And the fact that you asked me that question is disrespectful because you don't care about me, right? I can make that argument. My personal preference is exactly what you outlined. Hey, I noticed that you didn't want pizza, or you didn't want pineapple on the pizza over there. We're in a different place. Is it okay here? And then I have seen situations whereby asking the question to increase clarity, to increase explicit communication, will wear some people out. They will feel like you're not paying attention to them because you're asking all these questions and you didn't get it, and they're having to train you in everything. Whereas other people may take it in stride in a different fashion and just say, hey, thanks for asking, I appreciate it, right? It depends on expectations, it depends on the internal environment of that individual, or at least I would hypothesize that that's the case because that's what I've experienced, and that's what would seem to tie it together. Depending on how somebody looks at the world, whose responsibility is it, right? Are you more internal or are you more external? If you're more external, if I'm more external, it's your responsibility to know that I hate this thing, right? What you never told me, Sam. I shouldn't have to. You should pay attention to me, right? It's like, well, I do pay attention to you, however, you never gave me the clear cue. Well, I never went around it, so I figured you'd know, right? There's layers to it, and obviously there's some things that you will pick up and some things that you won't. But the further away from origin of learning something is in its expression, the harder it is likely for us to understand it or to predict it, because we're lacking the cue. We need the cue. So if I was to make a suggestion about communicating things regardless of learning situation, be it social learning or educational learning, make sure that the central features, to the best of your ability, are clear, right? Do that the best you can.
Right.
Now, it doesn't mean that it's the perfect communication, doesn't mean that the person's going to understand it, but do it the best you can and understand that they may miss it still, right? So I think you had brought up the question of, what if you don't understand what the deep feature of your thing is, right? Well, yeah, that's a problem, right? So then you can't communicate. You think you communicated, but you didn't, and it doesn't work, and they fail. You're like, but I told you explicitly. So again, here's the deal. If you go superficially on what I'm trying to communicate and what you're having a conversation with me about is to be explicit, right? If you don't understand what it is that you actually like or what it is that you're actually trying to share with somebody on the deeper level, you think that you've done it, and it didn't work. Well, the deal is, remember that we're all flawed. We're all going to have communication problems. We're all going to miss the mark on some level. So if somebody isn't able to replicate what you want them to replicate in a completely different situation, I would tend to an internal locus of control. And you know what? Maybe I didn't say it in a way you understood.
Let me attempt to re-explain it and possibly in a different way, or
to maybe have some pathos, to maybe have some patience. You're not always going to, because some people annoy both of us, right? Or anybody who may be taking this in. But the idea, again, be as explicit as you can about the central feature. Not about the frills, not about the window dressing, not about the nice decorative pillows. Why do you like decorative pillows? Because it makes me feel a certain way. Oh, what else makes you feel that way, right? That's the deep feature. The feeling is the deep feature, right? Not everybody's going to be in a position where they can appropriately communicate the deep feature, the central thing that they really like or that they really want or that they really hope you will replicate or understand about them. But, it may be up to each individual to at least put the effort in to try to figure it out. Now, again, the challenge is when you're trying to figure another person out in a social circumstance, asking them a lot of questions can wear them down, right? So that's a real phenomenon too, right? And they feel like you're not paying attention, but you are paying attention to you. You're paying attention, which is why you can figure out all these unique questions.
Right.
So it's an interesting thing. But again, my central contention is that, or not my contention, my curiosity is whether or not the phenomena observed in near and far transfer with respect to learning and education replicate in social learning. Because there's all kinds of times when you're from a different place than me, and where you're from, you express anger facially. It's expected that you express it like this, or you make some face, whereas I make whatever face I feel like at the time. Because where I'm from, nobody tells me what anger looks like.
Right.
I make it up as I go,
Yeah.
right? So we're not going to understand each other,
Right.
So there are going to be differences in a lot of things, and accepting that is useful, and understanding that you need to ask, or you need to ask and I need to tell.
Right.
Or I need to ask and you need to tell, whatever. It's, it's internal locus of control on both ends, but it's a two-way street on at least some level, right? So again, I don't know, do you think that at least in the way that I'm trying to couch this, that there's some value in it, that the phenomena of learning and transfer would replicate between educational settings and social settings?
I believe it would, but I feel like when we were talking earlier and I asked you whether or not these deeper seated concepts and things are being taught or replicated in the school system in that way,
Sure.
I feel like it's all superficial right now, and that's why it's
maybe writ large.
At large, the majority.
Yeah.
I feel like that is getting transferred into social settings where we're doing superficial things and we're not really focusing on the deeper.
Yeah.
But if we did the deeper, if it's working for near, I really think it would work for far. It makes sense that it would.
Well, I think near transfer is just because it's maybe an easier phenomenon to happen by accident.
Right.
Whereas far transfer is more difficult to happen by accident. It has to be on purpose. So there's a possibility that day to day, maybe as a social construct, that we could maybe influence a movement where people took more time and were taught more skills to get to those deeper things. People figure I believe I've experienced situations where the volume of questions somebody asks me about myself is them saying that they're really trying to get to deeply know me. And maybe that's true to them, but to me, I'm like, dude, you're just saying, just stop it. You're singing. I don't want it anymore, right? And it can wear you out. Because I know that it'll wear me out, my strategy would be, hey, stop asking me questions. I'm going to tell you a few things. God damn it, listen.
Yeah.
But again, me as an individual.
Right.
So I think maybe I'll bounce this off you. The point that you're attempting to put forward is, if this isn't a way that people are being trained, people are not being trained to look for deeper structures, and they're not being taught deeper structures. Why might we expect it to show up in day-to-day life?
Well, and it's the exact same thing where if you're not explicitly explaining these things, like I remember I was in math class when I was in grade school, and I would ask, why are we learning math? And I would expect the teacher to tell me, why am I learning all of these things?
Yes.
And they did. They broke it down for me. I had a couple of teachers, and they said, well, the world works on money and these money systems, so you're going to have to learn how to count, and this helps out this way, and this also applies to future learning, where you're going to be doing, if you want to do engineering or anything else, these all are factors.
See, I would call that a very superficial explanation, so it's a reasonable explanation because you accepted it.
Right.
I don't like it.
I was also 8. But
yeah. I truly wish that I had heard somebody describe math to me as a descriptive language. It describes relationships, right? If you understand the notation. It used to be, my understanding is that math actually used to be written out longhand.
Yeah.
With words.
Oh, really?
Yeah, with words.
Oh, wow.
Then double. Not like x squared.
Right.
It's like, okay, whatever you put here, I don't care. Just double it.
Right.
Whereas the notation is a newer development, historically speaking. Like math is a descriptive language, and it describes relationships well. If somebody had told me that, and it's like, if you want to understand anything, you're going to have to start to figure that out, right? And to be able to describe it in a meaningful way, regardless of circumstance only. If somebody had told me that, I would have probably liked it better.
Right.
Well, because money. Like, well, what about money?
Yeah.
I got a calculator.
Yeah.
They got cash registers. What do you mean? So I don't have to do that math. It does it for me.
Yeah.
So I appreciate the fact that you got an explanation that worked for you at the time.
Right.
I don't like that explanation.
No, that's right.
But I don't like going to the lowest common denominator. I'm going to throw out the complete explanation, or the best that I can. And when you look at me like I harmed you, I'm like, wait, that didn't work. Okay, let's adjust.
Yeah.
But that's me.
Okay.
Not everybody, and I get that. But I appreciate the concept that you're saying. If it's not happening day to day in our common education, at least here in the circumstances that you and I would experience, why would we expect it anywhere else?
Right.
Well, we wouldn't, right? So the idea is that there might be some value in continuing to communicate, that you need to be explicit, or you don't need to be explicit, but it's to your best.
It's beneficial.
It's in your best interest to be explicit about the central thing that you really like, as opposed to, hey, when we're at this store, I would like it if you did this thing.
Right.
Versus, hey, when we're in certain types of circumstances, I'd like you to be within 5 feet of me. In other types of circumstances, get 10 feet away from me. And these are the reasons.
Right.
Whatever it is. To have a guiding concept is important, and it allows you to behave in a way that I would like more appropriately in varying circumstances. So it's that explicit nature.
Right.
So I think that's a reasonable dive into this. Is there anything that you'd like to close with?
I just wanted to mention that you had brought it up, and I feel like it's important to kind of reiterate it, but it really is important to focus on where someone's coming from with their internal and external locus, their perception, the way that they're viewing that. So if
figure out what level they're working at.
Yes, because again, it can be very fatiguing and it can be taxing. And when you're sitting there going, I'm trying to figure you out, and they're sitting there going, stop asking me, just leave me alone. So it's one of those things where you're like, hey, we got to pace ourselves and kind of go.
I really don't like being asked questions about me. Okay. I guess I'm going to have to pay attention to all your actions and make inferences. And you say yes. I'm like, I'm going to be wrong a lot. That's okay. Or I'm going to be wrong a lot. Yeah, we're not going to ever be friends.
Exactly.
Right?
But either way, that's
So I can't read your mind. I can't predict for you. I can only make the predictions that I'm capable of making. They may not match what you want. So tell me your prediction model. I might do better. Right? So again, hopefully this is something that makes some sense to anybody who happens to be watching. The aim here is to say, I can't prove that near and far transfer as far as educational phenomena or phenomena observed within education will map onto social learning, but I think So again, I still haven't got a bigger memory card. But the big deal, explicitly communicate your central organizing concept if you're able. If you're not, that's okay. You'll figure it out over time. But be explicit in your communication. And another thing that I just kind of like to interject is that if somebody suggests to you that you don't know how to treat a person of description X, I would say that if I could walk up to anybody on the street of description X and behave in a specific way and it would have a specific outcome, then anybody who falls into that I would call fairly simple and fairly straightforward. I would like to know about you as an individual, whomsoever you may be when we're interacting. I want to know about you. I don't want to know about people who look like you. I don't want to know about people who smell like you. I want to know about you. Right? So that's why I happen to prefer explicit communication, explicit questions. And I don't know, is that something that you prefer?
Just in general, I do want to know about the individual.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Not the group that you relate to.
Yes.
Well, you already relate to the group. I don't care about that. I want to know about you.
Yes.
Fair enough. Anyways, hopefully you're attempting to be intelligent too, and I don't know, maybe you're not drinking like us, but we are, so.